real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at campfirecultpod for free. It'll really help us reach listeners just like you. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. Sorry for the delay, but the time off was needed and worth it. I've got some excellent episodes for you, starting with tonight's episode. It's a true grab bag of stories ranging from Skinwalkers, Wendigos and Mimics, to Glimmerman, and oddly enough, a bunnyman. So sit back, stoke the fire, pull your blankets tight, and keep an ear out for anything unusual. These stories will test the limits of your courage and make you think twice about venturing into the unknown. First up, we're headed to Gallup, New Mexico, where two friends ventured out late at night and have a terrifying experience that left them shaken.
I live in Gallup, New Mexico, which is surrounded by Native American culture and history. We have many nearby towns and reservations that have been here for a very long time, and many of the people claim they are haunted. My experience takes place right in Gallup on the east side of the city near a very small reservation. My best friend visited her sister every weekend. She lived in the low rental apartments on the east side. Right across from these apartments is an elementary school, the one I actually attended when I was a little girl. During those weekends, I would spend the night with my friend at her sister's apartment. When there was absolutely nothing to do and the kids and parents were asleep, we'd go outside to the park located in the middle of the apartments and hang out. One night we became so bored we actually took off walking. I'd say it was about 2 a.m. and we're wide awake. We walked behind apartments where there was no light, tons of bushes, and prairie dog holes in the ground. As we were walking, I sensed that someone was staring at us or following us. I am very sensitive, so when I sense someone is looking at me or following me, I'm usually right. I turned around to look and nothing was there. As I turned to look forward, my friend suddenly grabbed my arm and said, "Oh my God, what was that?" I looked into the darkness and saw nothing. The wind was blowing lightly and there were a few trees ahead of us, so I passed it off as the wind moved the leaves. I told her, "It's just the wind, chill out," and kept walking. But as I looked again, I saw what looked like a black figure moving through the trees. I stopped and said, "I think it might be a drunk crashing out back there for the night." Just so I wouldn't scare my friend, I kept a calm voice, which was awfully hard for me to do, because I was sensing that this thing in the trees wasn't good. I said, "Do you want to go back home?" And she said, "No, we're almost to the store. Let's just keep going." As we kept walking, we heard movement in the trees, so we started walking faster. I heard something behind us, and I looked, and it was like a wounded or hurt dog. I wasn't really scared, because where I live, there's a lot of that. But what I heard next stopped me dead in my tracks and paralyzed me. I heard this dog moan and growl at the same time as if it was ready to attack. I literally couldn't move, and my friend was trying to distract me, saying, come on, we gotta run." Her scream sounded distant, as if I had gone deaf or if she was far away. I had made eye contact with this thing, and I knew that that was a bad move. I closed my eyes and said a short prayer, and without even thinking, I turned around and ran for my life with my friend close by my side. I tried not to look behind us, but something was telling me to look. I glanced behind us, and a man was running after us. He wasn't just running, he was running on all fours. I screamed, and my friend joined in. only because I scared her when I yelled. We finally got to the road where light and cars were passing. We must have run for about 5 minutes straight and were completely out of breath. I remember our sides were aching and cramping as we stopped to catch our breath. I turned to look behind us and saw the man in the distant darkness running back to where we had come from. We walked a few more minutes until we finally reached the store. The lady behind the counter gave us a weird look and asked us, "Are you girls okay?" We replied out of breath, "Yes, just a late night run." I could tell she didn't believe us, so she asked, "Did you girls run from the apartments?" I answered, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Oh, are you girls sure you're okay?" We looked at each other and my friend told her, "Well, not really, we just had a horrible encounter with something. We don't know what it is or who it was." The lady said, "You girls just ran from a skinwalker. Whoever it was always chases someone he catches walking the road at night. You girls are lucky you made it this far." As if we weren't shaken up already, what she had just told us struck a nerve. I have heard similar tales from my grandmother. We didn't have any money, but she offered us a bottle of water and a ride back home. She closed down the store and we got into her pickup. As we passed the bushes and trees where we had previously come from, we both saw something running. The lady told us to ignore it and close our eyes. We finally entered the apartment complex and she asked us, "Which is yours?" I pointed in the direction of our apartment. As we were getting out of the pickup, she told us, "You girls stay home at night now. There's no need for you two young girls to be running around at 2 a.m. Keep yourselves safe, you hear?" We nodded and said goodbye and thank you. After that, we never left the apartment complex after dark. To this day, I am still shaken about what I had experienced, and I still don't really know what it was that chased us that night.
Up next, a stargazing trip to Algonquin Park turns terrifying when a creature with glowing red eyes chases a man through the dark woods.
To give a complete rundown, I live in Ontario, Canada, close to Toronto. I heard on the news that tonight there would be a chance to see the Northern Lights again. This past May, I went and saw them and wanted to take the opportunity to see them again. Last May, I went with a couple buddies, but no one was available this time. The plan was to drive 4 hours to Algonquin Park, hike to the middle of the forest, make a campfire, and drive back after stargazing. I end up driving about 2 hours there before my friend sends me a text showing there's no real forecast for the Northern Lights. I decided to go up anyway and stargaze because it's a hobby of mine. I drive up another hour, and at this point it's about 11 p.m. in the middle of nowhere. No signs of humans other than the road in the pitch black. I was on a call with my buddy since it was pretty boring driving up. I started mentioning how beautiful the stars looked. My buddy then recommended that I pull over and take some pictures to send. I end up pulling over, turning off all the lights in my car, but left it running, and stood beside the forest. For about 5 minutes, everything was fine as I was admiring the stars, gushing to him about it. Right about that time, the forest went completely quiet. There was literally zero sound other than the wind in the trees. I immediately felt like something was wrong and went to grab my flashlight to see if there was a bear or something. I walk a little bit into the woods and turn on my flashlight. I end up hearing a rustling noise and turned around until I see this thing standing on its hind legs with a bright orange-red glow in its eyes. It was about 50 meters away. I start mentioning what I'm seeing to my buddy when all of a sudden my signal goes dead. I stare at it for a second until it starts sprinting at me at full speed. I immediately go into full fight or flight mode and it's a mad dash to my car. I go in and redline it until I'm doing 200 kilometers per hour. That's about 120 miles per hour for the American listeners. I'm usually a pretty casual guy and not spooked by much. I was shaking, crying, sobbing, and trying to get away as fast as I could. Before anyone says anything, it wasn't a bear or anything similar. I start spam calling everyone and anyone I can until I get a hold of my best friend. I start crying and sobbing about what happened while freaking out. At this point, he just wants to check in to see if I'm okay and whatnot. I start describing to him what I saw. It was an unnatural-looking thing, and it had really spooked me. Right around here is when I feel all the muscles in my body start becoming sore and cramping up. It turned out when I had initially dashed to my car, I basically output all the force I could to get away. I'm an ex-rugby player and powerlifter, so my instincts were forcibly making me get out as fast as possible. After about 30 seconds of talking about it, I see the same figure on the side of the road following me with its head and glowing eyes. I proceed to hyperventilate and freak out more until my buddy calms me down and tells me to get the fuck out of there. I started looking for a way to make a U-turn but couldn't find anything. At this point, I drive another 15 minutes before I can find somewhere to turn without stopping. I start to slow down and U-turn before I hear this ear-splitting screaming sound from my window. I gun it back in the direction I came. I start freaking out more, telling my friend everything as it was happening. I started getting a sinking feeling in my stomach that something was watching me. I start to look all over the empty roads and see nothing. All of a sudden, my signal goes out again. I hear the screaming sound and see a kind of humanoid body in the fetal position on the side of the road. I then see its head look up and stare at me directly. I gun it again and can't get the goosebumps and sinking feeling to stop. I continue trying to contact everyone I can to no avail. As I drove, I ended up trying to calm myself down with some music and start to hear something tapping my sunroof. I know it wanted me to look, but I stayed strong and never looked, but also never lost that sinking feeling that it was there, with only inches between us. I would hear the tapping sound on and off for about an hour until I reached a small town. At this point, I've gotten a hold of my friend and I'm just trying to get back as fast as possible. After about an hour of paranoia, I stop crying and freaking out. I drive as fast as possible to get home, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still stalking me. When I got home, I locked all my doors and windows and was shaking like crazy. I don't know what to do. I feel like it's still stalking me.
What a terrifying story. Sounds like whatever was stalking this stargazer could still be watching over him quietly from the dark places. Next, a man who is visiting his family's Navajo reservation ranch has a shared terrifying encounter with a possible skinwalker.
My father is Navajo, who was raised on the res in northern Arizona. My mom is white. She was raised in western Canada. I grew up in Southern California, but grew up going to the res every year. I eventually moved and worked there. The earliest experience I had was on one of my first solo trips without my parents out to our ranch on the reservation. I traveled with my cousin and a few friends. Our ranch is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The nearest people, being at the very closest, are about 10 miles away, so you're pretty much on your own. On our first night out there, we arrived around 2 a.m. and there was no moon and it was pitch black. We had a hard time finding our hogan, a traditional octagon-shaped Navajo house. We decided to just camp near a cattle corral, which we found. We set up tents and knocked out until the sun came up. When I woke up, I took a little walk around our campsite and found coyote tracks which encircled our camp and actually got pretty close to the tents and campfire, which was pretty weird and a bad sign for several reasons. The rest of the day went without incident. We woke up, cooked breakfast, explored the north rim of the Grand Canyon on the reservation side, and checked out old hogans in the area. We stayed up particularly late that night. We had been out exploring at night and four-wheeling on some off-road trails. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and we were driving on a rocky road that went up into a small canyon. There were steep hillsides on both sides of me. I was standing in the back of the truck with a spotlight. That was when I first saw the light. The best way to describe what I saw was the visual effect of when you're standing in a room and someone behind you takes a picture with a flash. There was a brief instant in which everything lit up behind me, but it was a dull orange-reddish light. I turned around towards where it came from and shined the light around, but there was nothing there whatsoever, just a bunch of rocks. We thought it was weird, but kept driving. Once on top of the hill, we stopped to look around and noticed the weird light again, but this time it was far away, at least several miles. It was the same color, but it looked like a muzzle flash from a gun. I waited and waited to hear the gunshot, thinking it was people like us shooting at night, but it never came. Then we saw another flash, but this time it was several miles to the west, and a little bit closer. Then another and another, closer and closer, all within a few minutes. We decided it was a little weird, and without talking about it, Turned around and went to the Hogan this time. We didn't really talk about the lights for some reason, and all settled down in the Hogan. There was myself, my cousin, and my 2 friends. We talked for a while, and it was that moment when everyone stopped talking and everyone was just about to fall asleep when it happened. The door, there's only one door, a small wooden door that locks shut, shook violently as if someone kicked the door as hard as they could. It was loud and strong enough to where you could hear the lock rattle, and the door bounce back and rattle against the wooden frame. My friends shot up in bed and said, "What the fuck was that?" They had reason to be alarmed. We were very far from anyone else, and they knew that. It's extremely quiet out there, pretty much a deafening silence, and you can hear when vehicles are approaching. I got out of bed, grabbed a shotgun, and told my cousin to get his rifle. I walked to the door, motioned for him to come over, and said, "You go left, I'll go right." I'm not really sure why, but I wasn't scared, despite the obvious weirdness of what was going on. I ripped the door open, and we both slipped out the door one after the other and swept the area. Looked everywhere we could, went to the truck, got the spotlight, and swept the area. Nothing. No footprints, no animals, nothing. We decided to send a message and shot some rounds off to scare whatever it was away. I think we were all kind of worried, but eventually we went back into the Hogan and settled back in, kind of joking about it to calm our nerves. Eventually they all fell asleep, but I hid my nervousness and my heart was still racing. It wasn't until everyone was quiet and asleep that I noticed the thumping. I heard it very faintly through the rock walls, and when I put my ear to the wall, I heard it a lot better. It was a very rhythmic thumping sound, something very heavy, and timed the same every single thump. It sounded as if it was coming through the rock table that the Hogan sits on top of. I tried to rationalize it and told myself it was just the cows, and somehow managed to fall asleep. I woke up the next morning and we went to check the cows, which were about 10 miles away on the ranch and hadn't been anywhere near our Hogan that night. Several days later, after I told my aunts about what happened, they told me that one of my Navajo grandmas, who lived alone and out in the middle of nowhere, had a weird thing happen too. The same night we had our door kicked, someone had knocked on her door in the middle of the night. When she opened the door, there was no one there. My aunts think it was a skinwalker who was messing with me and my cousin because we're mixed race. I'm not sure that is the reason why it happened, but I do believe it may have been a skinwalker. I would really like to know what others think.
Real quick, some of you may know, but most probably don't. I launched my own coffee brand called Outlands Coffee. Not only do I run it, but I'm also the one roasting every single batch. If you love damn good coffee and want to support a fiercely independent small business while also supporting this podcast, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and give us a shot. We roast to order single origin perfection alongside a couple of bold, adventurous blends. Crafted for those who take coffee as seriously as they do their campfire stories. Here in Washington, we don't just believe in Bigfoot, we believe in a great cup of coffee too. Try it out for yourself. Use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order. Now, back to the show. Next up, a late night drive on a dark Oregon road leads to a crashed SUV, eerie bloodstains, and a pale, glowing-eyed figure watching from the woods.
This happened a couple years ago, March 24th, 2022. I was 16 and had just got my license. My friend's family was going on a day trip to the beach in Pacific City, Oregon. A few of our friends decided since I just got my license and a new-to-me car, we should load up in my old 300ZX, take the T-tops off, and go for a nice trip to the coast. All was going well, other than the discomfort of 4 guys crammed into a small coupe on a 2-hour drive. We eventually made it to the coast and had a good day. After we had packed up our things and started to head home, my friend suggested we take a road he knew, Nestucca Access Road for anyone familiar with the Tillamook Forest, back home instead of the main highway. It would take about an extra 45 to 60 minutes, but he said it was pretty and would be a nice change in scenery, so I obliged. The sun was setting, and in the thick forest it got dark quick. Before we knew it, there was no cell service, no houses, and absolutely no cars, which is pretty typical for the mountain ranges between the Oregon coast and the Portland metro area, so it wasn't anything I was worrying about. After about 10 more miles, I saw a green SUV hauling a fifth wheel, crashed and off the side of the road. Being that no one was around, I decided we should pull over and see if everyone was okay and offer any help we could. It was probably 8 to 10 feet off the road on a slope, only caught by the trees it had hit. The fifth wheel was absolutely trashed. Both of the sidewalls were caved in, with the contents of the RV spilled all along the side of the drop-off. The SUV was filled with clothes and food wrappers. Almost all of the windows were shattered, and there were some pretty significant bloodstains on what was left of the driver door glass and the windshield. It didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary for how bad the crash was. There was no one in or near the car. A truck had stopped by us, and we told him we didn't see anyone and that we would just be on our way, so he kept driving. We had to go pretty slow as the condition of the road was getting worse and worse, with massive potholes and cracks in the road, and it definitely was not intended for lower cars. I'd say about 3 to 5 miles after the crash site, there was a pretty sharp right-hand turn with a pullover area on the apex of the turn. As my dim headlights lit up the trees behind the pull-off, I saw what looked like a pale man with saggy skin. From what I could tell, he was fully naked, but was sort of behind some tall grass shrubs, so I could really only see up to the bottom of his stomach. He had no hair and was kind of scrunched over, like how you would imagine an old man hunched over, just staring at my car. He didn't have prominent features, but the biggest part I remember is his eyes reflected my headlights bright like a cat's eyes. His whole body turned to keep looking at the car as we drove by. I didn't know what to do or what to think. My friends in the car were all staring behind us and claimed that it kind of leaned out of the shrubs to watch us drive off. We were all freaked out, and we were discussing what we just saw, whether we thought it was some tweaker that had crashed his car and just walked off, or if it was some paranormal creature. I kind of played it off as the first option, but the more I thought about it, it seemed like something you'd see in a liminal space or a bad AI-generated image. No eyebrows, no hair, pale, white, saggy skin like when a person loses hundreds of pounds in a small amount of time, except it was saggy on its cheeks and neck and arms, etc., but seemed scrawny and frail. We sped home, and I kind of just told people the story when the subject of paranormal experiences came up. About July of 2023, my at-the-time girlfriend's brother and I were pretty close, and so he, his friend, and I were up driving through the trails of Dixie Mountain, talking ghost stories and such when I told them this story. Her brother's friend said he'd seen the same crash and showed me a picture of the same SUV I saw, but he said he didn't see anything creepy. I don't know what I saw or what happened, but it definitely scared me and my friends, and I've never been back on that road since that day. Maybe someone's seen something similar or had a similar experience in the Oregon wilderness that they'd share.
Coming up, two friends in northern Wisconsin see a cloaked creature running along the tree line.
In 1999, the year I graduated from college, my friend and I were in Crooked Lake, Wisconsin. It was late afternoon at around 5 p.m. It was late spring and full daylight. We had parked on County Road W in an area where there was a clearing of around 20 square yards. We were both leaning on the car just looking around when I saw what looked like the cloaked predator from the film run along the tree line. I hesitated for a second, then turned to my buddy and asked him, "Have you ever seen that movie Predator?" He replied, "Yeah, I just saw that thing too, dude." We remained calm, finished our beers, the first beer of the day as we were completely sober, and then got the hell out of there. That spring, there was one other time where I saw something running along the tree line while cloaked like the predator. It was while I was looking out the bay window of my friend's cabin. It was running through the front yard along the tree line. The cabin was in the same general area, but north of Crooked Lake. In both instances, it had a human-like form, but was almost transparent. Very weird.
Now, Crooked Lake is in northern Wisconsin, or as locals call it, up north, about an hour northwest of Green Bay. If you've never been to that area of the country, the forests can get as thick and lush as they do here in Washington state. Could there be cloaked Bigfoot in the Midwest? There have definitely been reports of Bigfoot sightings, especially in the Kettle Moraine area. Wisconsin is also where the Beast of Bray Road was witnessed. Could the cloaked being be a dogman of some kind or something completely different? Let me know what you think. Next is a strange one. Not as much paranormal as it is just downright creepy.
Not sure this story is of a paranormal nature, but I have seen this person on 2 occasions. I've never experienced hallucinations. I am of sound mind, and I do not do drugs. The first occasion was around October. I go to my weekend job pretty early at 4 a.m., and I wake up around 3 to take my dog outside to do his business. My dog is hyper-aware of anything and everything and barks at any noise, including a door shutting or a bird landing near him. I was standing on my back deck, and I saw a figure moving down the dark alley. This was a chilly morning in October, and it was raining heavily. I hardly ever see anyone else out in my neighborhood at this time because it's a pretty small town, especially walking in such heavy rain. I look over, and the man walking is wearing what looks to be a full-body bunny costume, kind of like the kid in A Christmas Story. Giant bunny feet and ears and everything, but it sort of also reminded me more of the character in Donnie Darko. Now he's probably 200 to 300 feet away. He was walking in a manner that was just unsettling and unnatural looking to me, sort of stomping and swaying from side to side very mechanically with an arched back. Then, after I observed him for about 5 seconds, it was like he sensed that I was looking at him. He turned around, and I could not make out if he had a mask on or what, but it was not a normal human face. I know I was far away, but I became terrified. I have an above-ground pool in my yard. My dog was to the left of it, so he wasn't seeing this bunny man or reacting at all. I start to pull his leash to get him to come back up on the deck to go back in the house. This was all within the same 10-second or so span of the bunny man turning around. I look over in its direction again, and he is behind a tree staring at me in my next-door neighbor's yard. The tree is a pine or some kind of evergreen. I could see most of his body, and even could sense his face still peeking through the needles. Now this is about 50 feet from me right behind my fence, and it didn't make any sense that he could move that fast in a matter of just a few seconds. I would have seen him running over there. At this point, I didn't even want to go outside and get in my car to go to work, but I had to. I was pretty scared the rest of the morning, but later just convinced myself it was a hallucination. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep, or maybe it was just a weird guy on drugs or something trying to scare people. I tried to forget about it. But then recently I was walking my dog at Fernicliff State Park. It was in the afternoon, in the bluffs along the Mississippi River in southern Illinois, probably about 30 minutes from my house. There is an old wooden cabin-style building on the property grounds near the parking lot. We had been there for about an hour and a half, and my dog was panting pretty heavily. He has a thick fur coat, and I forgot to bring water in a bowl for him, so I decided to turn back. When we were almost back to my Jeep, I looked up at the cabin, and sure enough, this same bunny man was walking in the same unsettling manner. He's walking away from us along a trail that runs along the left side of the cabin if you're facing it. This time, my dog barked at him, so I know I wasn't the only one seeing him. It was crazy. I couldn't believe I saw him again. My dog is a very big and strong Great Pyrenees, so I'm pulling him as hard as I can and sort of sprinting to the car, which is just about 100 meters away. I turned around for one brief second, and the bunny man was on the other side of the cabin now, peeking his head around the corner. I didn't get a great look at his face, but it looked sinister. I saw no recognizable features besides a terrifying grin and large dark eyes, but it was obscured by the shadows of the roof and the nearby trees. I still don't know what this experience means. I don't know if it's just a weird person that is trying to scare people and just happened to be at the same place as me twice, or if there truly is some kind of dark entity that looks like a giant bunny monster making himself known to me for some reason. I tried to tell a few close friends about my experiences, and nobody believed me. I also have no proof. The first time was raining, and my phone was inside. This time, I didn't even think about pulling my phone out and snapping a picture when both my hands were occupied, pulling on my dog's leash and running.
This is wild and terrifying. Like seeing a clown late at night in a dark alley, I'm sure seeing a person in a rabbit costume is equally as terrifying. You have two options really. One, you're losing your mind and seeing things, or this is a real person, late at night, in a dark alley, in the rain. Either way, it's not a great situation, and one I hope I'm never in. Then, on top of that, seeing it again while on a hike, I'd be scared to go outside ever again. What if it's closer to what Frank the Rabbit from the cult classic Donnie Darko represented? An embodiment of the dark, destructive side of Donnie. Here's another thought on what this might be. It's been reported that entities, like an alien, cryptid, or the like, will disguise themselves as something familiar or non-threatening to the viewer, although seeing a man-sized rabbit is anything but non-threatening. I'd love to know what you think in the comments. Next up is a user submission from Charles of his experiences in his childhood home that sparked a lifelong journey into the supernatural. These encounters took place in a house I lived in as a kid in central North Carolina. My family moved around a lot, but this was our second home. We lived there for about 5 or 6 years, and everyone in the family had multiple encounters with a ghostly presence. For context, my parents knew the homeowners and the previous resident who had lived and died in the house. It was a 2-story home surrounded by a fence with a big field in the back where we'd play hide and seek in the dark. When you walked through the front door, you entered a social room. To the left was a room we called the blue room because everything in it was blue, the walls, the curtains, and even the plush carpet. Past the social room was the living room and kitchen, separated only by a countertop. The living room had a simple brick fireplace, and the laundry room was next to the kitchen. In fact, you could see it from the front door. On the other side of the laundry room were my parents' bedroom and a bathroom. A small transition area led to another room, though it wasn't very big. In that room were the stairs to the second floor and a side door leading outside. Upstairs, the stairs led into one open room, which connected to another room with a skylight, an upstairs bathroom, and a third room with a small window that overlooked the outside. Now, on to the ghost encounters. The first ghostly encounter I remember, and the one I saw most clearly, happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old. It was during that transition from fall to winter. I had just taken a shower downstairs since the upstairs bathroom didn't have one. My parents had started a fire to warm up the house, and my siblings and I had a habit of sitting by the fireplace after showers to dry off faster. I was sitting in my pajamas on the base of the fireplace, my brother beside me also warming up. He had showered before me, and my sister was sitting on the edge of the couch. My parents sat at the other end of the couch, from where they could see into the doorway leading to the social room and the blue room. At that time, my brother and I had recently moved from upstairs into the blue room. I remember seeing strange scratch marks on the wall near my bed. Deep, deliberate, and not the kind you'd get from moving furniture. I didn't like them. Anyway, as we sat there talking, I suddenly had the urge to turn around and look into the social room. The room was dark, and the door to the blue room was open. That's when I saw it. A white humanoid shape with no face. It had no visible feet, as if its lower half simply faded away. It moved from inside the blue room into the social room, disappearing completely just as it would have moved out of my sight. I turned back and asked, "Did anyone see that?" To my surprise, my parents had, but they didn't seem scared. They casually said it was the former resident who had passed away in the house. Apparently, he had died in the blue room. I don't know if they were just trying to keep me calm, but oddly enough, I didn't feel afraid. There was nothing threatening about the figure. So, we all went on with our night as if nothing had happened. Later, my parents shared one of their own encounters. One afternoon, my dad came home from work, sat on the couch, and took off his boots, placing them on the coffee table in the living room. He then went to his bedroom, changed, and returned to the living room, where he and my mom sat talking. As they sat there, they both saw one of my dad's boots lift into the air, on its own. It floated off the table and moved over to the base of the fireplace, as if the ghost was telling him, "Hey, don't do that." The encounter was brief, but it left an impression. While my ghostly encounter had felt neutral, almost peaceful, my brother and sister had a much darker experience about a year later. For some reason that night, all three of us, my brother, my sister, and I, were sleeping on the floor in my parents' bedroom. I fell asleep quickly, as did my sister. But in the middle of the night, my brother woke up. Tossing and turning, he struggled to get comfortable. Finally, he rolled onto his back and opened his eyes for just a second. That's when he saw it. A tall, dark figure stood in the doorway. It had no face, no discernible features, just a humanoid shape. But this figure wasn't like the white apparition I had seen. It was black, darker than the darkness around it, and it filled the entire doorway. A greenish rim outlined its form, not glowing, but still visible. like the way light creates a silhouette around someone standing at the wrong angle. My brother froze. The figure just stood there watching us. He doesn't remember what happened next. Maybe he forced himself to sleep. Maybe it eventually disappeared. But the next morning, he told us what he had seen. That's when my sister spoke up. She had woken up at some point during the night too, and she had seen it as well. She said she immediately felt like she wasn't supposed to see it, like this thing had bad intentions. But nothing happened, or at least nothing that we remember. That was the haunted house I lived in as a kid, and that's where my journey into the supernatural began. Next is another listener submission. This story is from Cynthia from Indiana, submitted via voicemail. I love getting these, so keep them coming.
Hi, this is Cynthia calling from Avon, Indiana. I'm a first-time caller, and I have a story for you. And this is a true story. It took place in the 1980s, and we had a UFO encounter that I'd like to also tell you about. Met an alien named Jeffrey, who has haunted us to this day. Well, here's to the point of our story. We were visiting the last encounter I told you about happened in Turkey Run State Park, and our second encounter was at McCormick's Creek State Park in Indiana. And we were a family of four. Both my parents were living and my grandparents were living, and they decided to go with us to a state park one weekend. And we didn't eat there at the inn, we ate somewhere else. But anyway, we were hiking along the trail, and we had two dogs with us, a little dachshund named Sandy, about less than a year old, and we had another dog named Backyard Gate. My dad named him, she called him Fred on the side, he was about 2 years old. But anyway, we were taking a hike through the woods, and a ghostly Spanish lady kept following us. She was dressed in a blue, old-fashioned dress, and she had her hair up in a bun, and she was speaking Spanish. Of course, I couldn't understand Spanish. I just heard her say, hacienda, which means house in Spanish, and she said, CC, and she said a couple other phrases which I can't understand. She just kept talking about her children all the time, and I couldn't understand what she was talking about. I tried convincing her that she did have children. They were now adults or had descendants, and her original children were up in heaven. But anyway, I wasn't getting anywhere with her. She was stuck in the past, and I guess she wants to remain stuck in the past. But anyway, she followed us all around the state parks, trails, and we tried to get rid of her. And the only time that we were able to get rid of her was when we walked through a mist on the trail, and it brought us back to this time. But we saw her as solid as lifelike as she could be. She was dressed like in a Spanish shawl or a blue dress like they wear. But anyway, this is a true story, and I have several other encounters I would like to tell you about, and I was hoping you'd have me on my story on your podcast. I'd love to share it with you. I just discovered your podcast this week, and I've had a ball listening to it. But I've got so many stories for you, it would knock your socks off.
Thank you again to Cynthia for submitting her story. I've actually talked to Cynthia, and as it turns out, she has a few other stories to tell that I'll be recording with her in the near future. For our final story of the evening, three friends hike to a mountaintop tower, and what they witness follows them home.
Back in 2012, two friends and I, let's call them D and J, went to Look Rock, a concrete observation tower perched atop Chilhowie Mountain in Blount County, Tennessee. To reach the tower, you park in a small pull-off and walk a paved trail about half a mile up the mountain. I've visited this tower many times, and there's always an energy in the air. You can't see it, but you can feel it, like the woods themselves have acquired sentience and are barely tolerating your presence. But this particular night was different. It was eerily quiet. Normally, the woods are alive with sounds, cicadas, the rustling wind, the occasional scurry of an animal. But that night, there was nothing. It was as if the forest had gone silent in fear, paralyzed by something unseen. The hike up was uneventful, aside from the overwhelming sense of unease. We reached the tower and spent a couple of hours talking. Finally, around 3 a.m., we decided to call it a night and began our descent. At the base of the tower, there are a few large boulders, each about 6 feet in diameter, placed decoratively. As we walked past, I saw something that turned the night from unsettling to terrifying. Squatting on one of the boulders was a solid black figure, about 4 to 5 feet tall with glowing red eyes. It stared at us for a second, then vanished into thin air. I was the only one who saw it. Assuming my eyes were playing tricks on me, I hesitated but continued walking. The feeling of unease followed us down the trail. About halfway down, we reached a point where the trail takes a sharp 90-degree turn to the right. Straight ahead, there's an ATV access trail for park rangers. As we approached the turn, I noticed something chilling, an extra set of footsteps. There were 3 of us, but 4 sets of steps. I stopped and looked. Right behind Jay stood a towering, 7-foot-tall heat distortion, like the shimmering air above a scorching grill in summer. It was vaguely human-shaped. Like the figure on the boulder, it disappeared after a few seconds. At that point, we bolted. Further down the trail, we passed a fallen tree wedged into the split trunk of another, forming a triangular gap near the ground. At the top of that triangle crouched the same black form with red eyes. Once again, it vanished the moment I saw it. Everything in us screamed, "Run!" We sprinted to the truck, tore down Foothills Parkway, and didn't stop until we reached the highway. The rest of the drive was uneventful. We dropped Jay off at his house, then I drove Dee home, about 15 minutes away. Just as I was pulling out of Dee's driveway, his phone rang. He answered, turned pale, and frantically waved me down. Something had happened at Jay's house. We sped back. Every light in his house was on. We rushed inside and found Jay in bed, gripping a Bible in one hand and a .45 in the other. Jay's bedroom faces a street light. He also has a nightlight, a clock, and a stereo, all of which usually keep his room fairly well lit. But something was wrong. He told us he had gone to bed as usual, when suddenly the room went dark. He could still see the streetlight, the clock, and the stereo. They were all still lit. But somehow their glow didn't reach the room. He couldn't even see his hand in front of his face. Then something put its hand on his throat and growled in his face, and just as suddenly, it was gone. By the time we arrived, the presence had vanished. We never saw or heard from it again. We've returned to the tower several times since, but it's never been the same. The woods are always quiet now, like they're afraid.
That's all for tonight, dear listeners, unless you are a Patreon cult member, that is, where I've got a few more tales to keep you at the edge of your seat. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at campfirecultpod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.